thank you for watching another episode of Sharon. He started the timer for me. Thank you so much, DJ. Thank you so much for watching another episode. Here we are with whatever episode number this is, because I can't remember. And we're going to start out with Got Him.
Got him.
Anyways, for the people that didn't hear, I just shot Kyle with a Nerf bullet
from under the table.
From under the table, like I'm 007.
Quick draw. This dude looks like he's fixing to come across the table.
I know it.
He won't know when or where.
Does he realize there's a 2-syllable word called payback?
Oh no, he won't. He won't know when or where.
I think he's too young to know what payback is.
2 syllables.
He won't know when or where.
Just like we won't know when the time is that the Lord is coming back. It's a great sentence.
Segue.
Nice.
Anyways, thank you for watching and or listening another episode of the Sharon Jesus podcast. We're going to start out with another get to know you question. What is your favorite color and why?
Well, here's... You've asked a difficult question because my overall favorite color is purple.
Overall?
Oh, like
you know
overall...
what a great combo for purple is?
Black.
Gold. Dun, 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 dun.
LSU.
All right, and this is where I exit the podcast. It's purple, but right now, for the last couple of years, it's been this kind of hunter green color. So it's really known as hemp green, but if you type that up, that's the number of the code that it pulls up.
What's the color code?
Oh, I couldn't tell you.
There's a guy that can like look at a color and tell you its color code.
It is the craziest
It's
thing.
wild. But anyways.
Yes.
What is that color? What does that mean?
So every single color in the entire world has a color code, and it's a combination of numbers and letters. It's almost like algebra. It's like an equation of
So
how.
it's something I'll never use.
Exactly.
If you knew the color code of a specific color that you're looking for, you can walk into a place like Sharon Williams and say, "Hey, I need this color code." They type it into their computer, and it will pull up the exact shade you're looking for.
Interesting.
Yep.
It's pretty crazy.
Pretty neat. Have you ever seen the guy that
Yes.
on TikTok that can take any color that you give him and match it identically with paint right there in front of you?
Yep.
Hand paint.
Really?
It's
crazy.
It's pretty neat.
Is he like Bob Ross's grandson?
I've never seen him paint a picture. I've just seen him match colors. But
Oh, okay.
That's
All right.
a skill developed. My favorite color is
Dallas Cowboys blue.
For those can't see, I'm waving Dallas Cowboy blue in front of DJ.
Is that color called
Even though they lost.
There's Always Next Year?
Yeah.
Is that what they call
I
that color?
preached about. Yeah.
And see, there's a musical genre called the blues.
that's called
Cowboys players are always doing that
that's
one.
called We Dem Boys.
That's called
Oh man, that's funny.
that's called weeping blue because we
Weeping.
usually cry.
Yeah, that's no joke. Hey, the Broncos didn't lose this week.
It's bye week.
Hey, here we go.
Favorite
There
color,
you go.
Kyle?
Favorite color is going to... I used to always say my favorite color was plaid, so it didn't narrow me down to one color, and I could
That's
just,
pretty good.
whatever color... I like plaid, which is not a lie, and so I'll go with plaid.
Mine is orange because the first bone I ever broke was my wrist. It was actually at church camp. I was on the top bunk at Box Springs.
I like where this is going.
And you guessed it, I fell off the top bunk.
Nice.
And all the pastors were outside. They were hanging out, talking or whatever. And they said, "Oh, some kid just fell off a bunk." Oh, no. And then I came outside, and I was like, "Dad, my arm hurts." And he took me to the nurse. He said, "You're fine." Gave me, an ibuprofen. And I was like, "All right, whatever." So I went back to sleep. Woke up the next morning, tried to push up off the breakfast table, and just was like in excruciating pain. Went to the hospital. "Oh, you broke your growth plate in your left hand." So I was like, "Oh, cool, whatever." And then they put me in a cast, and
that's why you're so short.
Yeah, because I broke my growth plate in my wrist.
Nice. Explains everything.
Good.
They asked me what color, and I didn't want black or white, and orange was the only fun color they had. So I was like, orange. And so it's been my favorite color ever since.
Nice.
In my
I
alumni.
noticed you said that yesterday in church, and I know obviously it's a fall color. I didn't know if there was a tie-in.
I said that in church yesterday?
You did. You said orange is my favorite color.
the spirit took over when he said that.
Yeah.
Apparently. Wow. Maybe he spoke it in tongues.
No.
Yeah.
And I was the interpreter.
Yeah, apparently. Apparently.
I know what he said.
There
It's
you
biblical.
go. Dude, talking about camp, I guess it was a couple years ago, maybe even 3. I think Rob was still the director at that point, but we had taken a group down there, and this girl that was like 70 pounds soaking wet. Okay. I get a text that a girl's fallen off the top bunk, and I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. So we go over there and make sure everybody's decent before we go in. And we go in, and what had happened was the piece of plywood that was on the top bunk wasn't wide enough. And she went to roll, and the plywood fell right through the frame onto the girl below.
Nice.
Oh, my.
And
Made
then
a
she
sandwich.
rolls over, and she didn't hurt herself. Well, I'm like, of course she didn't hurt herself. She had something to break her fall before she hit the ground. Another person below her. But you talking about falling off the top bunk made me think of that
That's
story.
awesome.
That's one of those
very
like
fun.
Youth Pastor Chronicle
Oh, yeah.
stories, you know.
Absolutely.
So we'd always our prank would be, oh, we're gonna take this guy's plywood out from underneath his bed and make sure no one's underneath it. This big old dude jumps up on the top bunk, jumps in, boom, yeah, fun church camp stories. Maybe we'll do that next summer. You know, share some church camp stories before we start heading off to camps and everything.
That was the same year I was terrified to sleep where I was, because I had like this 6'2",
Oh, no.
320 pound boy sleeping above me.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Absolutely
was
not.
like, and we were in a cabin where there was like no beds left. So I had to take the lower bunk. Every time he moved, the whole bunk just rocked. Oh, I was so nervous.
You saw the support sagging above you.
Yeah. Oh, so nervous.
So, you know, we always love to have fun, but I think I'm a preacher's kid. You're a preacher's kid. Kyle, were you a preacher's kid?
Not at all.
Okay, so being the only one not with children, you know, I've been raised in ministry. I want to know y'all's opinion on what are the difficulties. And this is, you know, if there are any pastors raising children out there, this would be a good question for y'all to hear from other pastors on. What are the difficulties of raising kids in the ministry while you're in the ministry?
Well, I know these guys, they can speak from past experience because all their kids are grown and moved on. But I'll say right now, especially with the 2-year-old, I've got a daughter that's fixing to turn 11 and then a son that just turned 2. We're in a season in life where it's difficult for us to take him places.
Yeah.
So like a football game on a Friday night, that's difficult for us because you got to sit in the stands. It's hard to contain a 2-year-old for even 5 minutes at a time, you know. So there's things that you do to try and work around that. You maybe you know, don't go to the stands. You stand off to the right. I'm thinking of Benton, the Palace when I'm talking about this, but there's a grass area off to the right and to the left. And you try to make sure the student sees you, and then normally at halftime, you're out, you know, because normally by halftime you've made about 4 trips around the stadium trying to keep up with a 2-year-old. But it's difficult at times. But you know, here at Sharon we have a great team of volunteers that, you know, we've got a nursery, we've got 18 to 36 month, we've got the 3-year to pre-K, we've got the K through 5, because the church that I left didn't have any of that. So it was like if somebody didn't offer to take Samson for us on a Wednesday night, we were having to take him into the student room, and then that's where it gets very difficult to preach while every time you talk, the baby starts to talk back to you and tries to talk really loud, and then it becomes a distraction, and then your wife takes them out, and then she's not getting to be a part of it, and it's a circus.
Yeah.
especially with little ones. Now Harper, she's pretty self-sufficient. I mean, she still needs us to do things for her, but she can get from point A to point B on her own. And normally she, like on a Wednesday night, she'll come here at 5, and she's like, all right, I'm going to eat. See you. And then I won't see her again until 8 when we're leaving. So when they get a little older, I think it becomes a little easier to do ministry. But that first 5-6 years it's a test. So.
And you're speaking of one aspect of make sure I understand Parker's question here. There's a couple of aspects of raising kids in the ministry. The aspect of when kids are young, actually doing ministry amongst raising your own kids, is basically my wife was a single mom while I'm preaching and doing things with people, because she's trying to make sure that I'm freed up. And, she's taken Caleb out. He was our most difficult child. And he's got some stories, everything from, diving down under the pews, going about 6 rows forward, popping up, sticking his tongue out at Miss Karen and waving his hands back and forth, and him being drug out, screaming at me while I'm preaching, "Daddy, save me!" as he's being drug out the back of the church. I just said, I'm right in the middle of my preaching. I just said, "Hey, y'all pray for that boy." And so that's one aspect of, like you said, the kids are little, balancing life and ministry. Then there's another aspect, and that is something that Karen and I talked about while we were dating. We knew was probably coming, and that was we did not want to lose our kids because of ministry, losing them to unbelief, losing them to burnout, losing them to people that were unkind or unloving. And we talked. I couldn't believe it as it segued down the timeline. Constantly and consistently trying to say, okay, how do we get our kids to love Jesus in spite of unloving people or situations at church? So, yeah, that's a neat memory that you just brought back, talking about balancing the youngins and doing ministry. And we love it, and it's our calling. And our wives are kind of
right.
And that's where they play such a vital role, that we got to have them, and they got to be a team player.
Right.
I feel my heart goes out. I've seen guys that had wives who were not involved in their ministry. I'm like, wow, they're carrying two burdens. They're burdened for the ministry, and they're carrying a burden of a spouse who is not really on board or not a team player. And I'm like, my heart just aches.
Right.
Because I had she was already committed. I was already in the ministry, been pastoring 2 years when he got married. And and I'd even taken Karen we'd went out to lunch with a couple of other older, seasoned ministry couples. And okay, what does Miss Karen need to look for? And she got some neat advice from some preachers' wives. Stuff like, don't drag your kid to every church event.
Right.
Exactly. Go to the ball games, do life. Let them have as normal and by that what they meant is that they weren't called into the ministry. Don't force them into this pedestal role. Here
right.
is the the preacher's kid, and we didn't. And I think because of that, and we did not hide anything from our kids. Now, when people were ugly or mean, we didn't. We didn't run down church members at home to them. We would speak like this. We would try to be real and consistent when people were unkind or unloving in certain situations. But say Sister Susie Q's one example I always use, or Joe Schmo was unkind and whatnot. I would say, we need to pray for Brother Joe. We need to pray for Miss Susie. And I'd say that meaning it. And I try to, which y'all know me well enough by now, I'm always going to steer it toward a positive. And how can I do it better? How can I improve? And I did that with the kids. How do I get them? How do I respond kindly and Christ-like in this tough situation, and them see it? My kids see it. Mm-hmm. And I did not want to lose them. And so far, thank the Lord, unless they could change tomorrow, but right now they are serving the Lord, and I know to be thankful because I've seen kids be raised to the best of their parents' ability, and they lose their kid. And it's not the parents' fault. And they did a great job. And I'm like, oh. And so I know it all comes down to them eventually making their own decision. Talking about the kid.
Right.
Our kids. So,
Yeah.
Whew.
I would say for me, it was I went a different direction with your question. What was the hardest thing about raising kids in the ministry is all of the expectations that were external on my kids, where, well, you shouldn't do that because your dad's the pastor.
Yep.
And it didn't allow that type of attitude, not allowing my 8-year-old sinner son to act like an 8-year-old sinner.
Yeah.
It didn't allow the boys to, and praise the Lord, I had boys, but my boys were all boy. And that meant they ran in church sometimes. And that meant that my oldest is very competitive. And so when we had upward basketball and he is running up and down the upward court and talking trash, that's that's just part of being a boy,
Yeah.
and that expectation where, we had a couple of people at different times. Well, you shouldn't act that way. Your daddy's a pastor. And I would hear it and I would talk to the boys and say, look, you are still discovering who Jesus is and who Jesus can be for you at 8. My expectation is not for you to be perfect. And I would have to visit with some adults that expectation that you just put on my son, do you have that same expectation? Because I would never speak to your kid the way that you just spoke to my kid.
Yeah.
And that's, if you have an issue with the way my boys are acting, you come talk to me. But they're not acting that way because of a lack of parenting. We parented our boys. I feel like we parented our boys very well. And they're great young men. We're seeing some neat things happen there. I will say that, part of that, and Harrison, our oldest, who's 24 now, was probably more aware of some of the stresses that I went through as a pastor. Some of the, just the hard times that I went through pastoring, some of the difficulties, some of the, he got to see it. I think he was more aware of it. And so, right now at 24, he's a little bit with church, loves Jesus. But as far as church, he's got some reservations there. And that's not anything that I feel like we could have protected him from in the setting that we were in. Having, they were raised in Albuquerque, and so they got to see a lot of different aspects of church. They got to see their dad work hard and love Jesus and try to lead his family in a way that they would love Jesus. And I, both boys love Jesus. But there are some reservations in I think in Harrison's life of, I'm not really sold on church. And so that for me as a dad who loves Jesus and loves the church, that's hard. At times, but I know that as far as his relationship with Christ, he's solid.
Yeah.
So just continue to encourage him. Hey, you need to find church.
And that's a journey that
enjoy coming to church and look forward to going to church. Rather, when I was a kid, it wasn't that way.
Right.
It was like, we got to go to church again. Oh, we got to go to another Wednesday night service. Like,
and Caleb felt that away.
What's going to happen this week?
Yeah, well, Caleb's idea of church from, say, you start running around, say, 2 years old, and till 13 was 4 letters, play. That's all he wanted to do, play. And if you made, torture is defined as sitting in a pew.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we tried to Yeah, and it all fell on Karen. She had to get inventive and tough and loving all at the same time. He did not want to.
I think it's cool that you asked a single question and there was 3 different
and I think,
perspectives.
Well,
I mean, there's
on
a fourth
that.
one.
I want to come
Yeah.
back to what you said about, going to stewardship meetings and that sort of thing, and sitting in there and seeing and hearing some of the across the room talk about you and that sort of thing. We didn't have that at our church in New Mexico. So, and coming from New Mexico, it's very much it's still the Old West in a lot of its mindset. So when someone didn't like you in our church, they came right to your face. And a lot of times it was, as a family, we're walking out and they're upset and they're in your face and they're doing this in front of your family.
Dude, could you imagine church in the Old West?
Oh,
I challenge you to a duel.
right.
Over church policy.
Well, I don't know that back then they were as educated. Right. And so that pastor that, a lot of times was just riding his horse from one town to the next, they were just like, we just want an educated person to talk to us, for the most part. But I remember one time we had a lady that was certifiably crazy who was coming and causing a disturbance in the church. And so that fell to me to deal with. And so we went through our processes and that sort of thing. And I ended up going to court, restraining orders, all this stuff. And I'm in the mall with my boys, and she had a restraining order. She couldn't get near me, that sort of thing. And Ashley and I and the boys, we were all shopping at Dillard's, and so the boys were like, we got to go to the bathroom. So I said, I'll take the boys. We'll go to the bathroom. And we're coming down the escalator. As we come down the escalator at the mall there on the west side of Albuquerque, I see her at the bottom of the escalator, and she's walking this way, and she has a badge that says she works at Dillard's, which I didn't know. And we're walking down, and and her eyes all lit up, and so she comes to me, and she's like, Pastor Kyle, I need to talk to you. I said her name, and I said, you are not to be within 100 feet of me. I need you to back up. I am with my family. And I had to be direct. And the boys are like, Dad, who's that? What's wrong with her? Why are you so mean? Dad, why are you being mean to her? Because they've never seen me like that.
Right.
But I had paperwork saying, you can't be near me because she was certifiable crazy. Yeah. And so here we are in public, and I had to be direct. I had to be forceful. I had to protect the kids. But they're watching this, and they're going, why is Dad being mean? He's not normally mean. When we would see people from the church, it was always, hey, how's it going? We would talk 15, 20 minutes, and then we're on. And that was, and that leads to another aspect. We couldn't go anywhere that there wasn't an interruption. And there's some of that latent within the boys that they resent as well.
Right.
That they didn't always appreciate our dinner out getting interrupted.
Yeah.
So you got to protect that.
I think it's crazy that we all 3 went different directions with one question, and I think it's because of where we're at in life. Like right now, I'm in the middle of raising kids. Mm-hmm. In the ministry. Right. And so the very first thing I think of is the difficulty of the action.
The logistics
of ministry.
Well, it's so multi-layered.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many different aspects of raising kids within ministry and, not getting off the rails with that. And how do we keep our kids so that as adults, they're loving Jesus?
Right.
Amen.
Right. That's
Amen.
right.
And, I'll just go and throw my viewpoint out there. As I still feel like I'm a kid, like I still feel like my father's son, but now I'm my own man doing my own ministry. One of my big things is that, like, he never forced us into ministry. Like, he actually tried to talk us out of it. Like, I specifically remember him trying to talk my brother out of ministry. And that's not, like, a bad thing. He just wanted to make sure that it wasn't him being forced as, an Abraham boy to go into ministry, because, there's a lot of ministers in our family, and, I don't want to say it's like family work, but, we're all in ministry. We all love doing it. And it's, I was never forced into the ministry. So I think that, if you're a preacher and you're listening to this, don't force your kids into the ministry if that's not what they're going to do.
Well, to tag off of that, yeah, I didn't grow up my dad wasn't a pastor. My dad was an over-the-road truck driver. But I remember 18, 19 years old, whenever I went to my parents and I said, I feel like God's calling me into ministry, my mom wept. And it wasn't tears of joy. It was, and this is what she said, and I quote, "Don't you know how people treat pastors?"
Yeah.
She was terrified of how people were going to treat me as a pastor, and she didn't want that. And it devastated her.
Yep. So, with that, we are at the 30-minute mark, and I finished another
Nice.
cup of coffee. I'm starting to feel like that's the kind of timer. I don't need the phone timer anymore. Whenever I'm done with a cup of coffee, my 8-ounce coffee, a little bit of creamer in there, that's when we're done. But thank you for listening to another episode of the Sharing Jesus podcast. We hope you have a great day.